That word guardianship lands like a chain. It's not just legal, it's spiritual. It's the world deciding you don't own yourself anymore. He can't, I whispered. Denise's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. He can try. I pressed my palms flat on the counter and stared at the cutting board where I'd sliced lemons earlier. The knife marks looked like little scars. This was not just humiliation. This was theft. And suddenly, beneath the shock, something else rose, something clean and cold. Clarity. I had known Malcolm was selfish. I had seen it in small moments. The way he talked over me. The way he assumed my time was his. The way he treated my home like an extension of his ego. I had excused it for years, calling it ambition, calling it stress, calling it he's just like that. But this was a plan. This was a man looking at his mother and seeing an obstacle. Denise touched my arm gently. Do you want me to read the petition? No, I said. Not yet. Because I didn't want to drown in his words. I wanted to remember mine. I lifted my chin. Tell me what he doesn't know. Denise's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? I walked to the pantry, opened the top shelf, and pulled down a tin I hadn't used in months. Inside, beneath old recipe cards and a faded photograph, was a slim folder wrapped in plastic. I didn't hand it to Denise right away. I just held it, felt the weight of it like a heartbeat. My husband, I said softly, loved Malcolm, but he didn't trust him. Denise didn't speak. She let silence do what it does best, make room for truth. I didn't want to believe it. I continued. I kept thinking love would teach him, that time would soften him, that being raised by a woman who worked for everything would make him respect what things cost. I swallowed. But my husband put things in place years ago quietly. Denise took the folder gently and opened it. Her eyes moved fast, her posture changed, and when she looked up, her voice was almost reverent. Oh, she breathed. Oh, Miss Ruth. There it was. The hinge Malcolm didn't know existed. The house, my house, was in a trust, not Malcolm's, not even mine, in the way he could manipulate. It was protected, sealed behind language my husband had insisted on after Malcolm's first disastrous business venture, after he'd borrowed money and lied about it, after he'd come home sweating and charming and full of apologies that smelled like fear. My husband had made sure the foundation couldn't be stolen by someone who only valued it when it made him look successful. Denise tapped one clause with her finger. He can't sell it, she said. He can't transfer it. He can't force it. Not through a guardianship petition. Not through a backdoor. This trust, this is steel. I exhaled slowly, like I'd been holding my breath for years without knowing it. In the living room, Malcolm's laughter rose, forced, brittle, performing for the guests who didn't know where to look. He was probably telling them I was emotional, that I needed rest, that age makes people dramatic. I looked at Denise and said, he chose tonight to make me small. Denise's eyes didn't blink. So, I said, feeling the cold calm settle deeper. I'm going to teach him what small really looks like, because Malcolm didn't just want my house, he wanted my disappearance. He wanted a clean story where his mother quietly faded into a facility while he married his shiny new life in the home I built. He wanted to wear my sacrifice like a suit. What he didn't realize, what men like him never realizes, that women who survive decades of being underestimated become experts in quiet strategy. We learn to smile while we calculate. We learn to listen while other people talk too much. We learn to keep receipts, not just for purchases, but for betrayals. I walked back into my living room after a few minutes, face composed, shoulders straight. The room fell into that awkward hush that happens when people sense something important has shifted. Malcolm turned toward me, relief flickering across his face when he saw I wasn't crying. He misread it as surrender. Mom, he said, stepping closer, voice softer. Let's talk tomorrow. I didn't want to do this in public, but I held up my hand gently. Not tonight, he tried to smile. Okay. We'll do this the right way. I looked at his fiancée, how her eyes were already wandering toward the hallway that led to my bedroom, as if she were mentally arranging her future furniture. And I thought, you poor, hungry child. You don't even know whose story you've stepped into. I let the party finish. I let people eat. I let them hug me with worried eyes. I told them I was tired. I thanked them for coming. I watched Malcolm play the gracious son as he ushered guests out, his arm around his fiancée like a trophy. When the last car pulled away and the house finally went quiet, Malcolm did something that would have broken me once. He walked through my living room like he already owned it. He loosened his tie, kicked off his shoes, opened my refrigerator without asking, and from the hallway I heard his fiancée say, in that sweet voice that hides sharp teeth, Babe, I want the master bedroom. The light is perfect for my content, and we'll need to repaint the kitchen. This beige is depressing. Malcolm laughed. Whatever you want. It's basically ours now. Basically. That word is the favorite weapon of entitled people. It's not fact. It's assumption dressed as destiny. I went to my bedroom and closed the door. I didn't lock it. I wanted them to feel comfortable, overconfident, careless. Then, I opened my bedside drawer and pulled out my own envelope. Not legal papers, my husband's last letter to me, sealed years ago, the ink slightly faded but the message still sharp. I read it again by lamplight, tears finally slipping out, not from weakness, but from grief and gratitude braided together. He had known. He had loved me enough to protect me from the future version of our son. And in that love, I found my spine. That next morning, I didn't confront Malcolm. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I made coffee. I moved slowly on purpose. The way older women do when they're being watched, when they want someone to believe they're harmless. I hummed quietly. I asked Malcolm if he wanted eggs. He stared at me, suspicious. You're okay, I smiled. It was a long night, I said. 70 feels heavy sometimes. His shoulders loosened. He wanted me heavy. Heavy means compliant. Heavy means easier to move. He kissed my cheek like he was a good son and said, "We'll handle everything. I'll take care of you." I wanted to laugh. Instead, I said, "Thank you, baby." Then, after he left, I called Denise, and I said, "Open the war chest," because Malcolm had a world outside my home. A world he thought was untouchable. His reputation, his investments, his business partnerships, the image he polished like armor. And my husband, quiet, cautious, loving, had left me more than a protected house. He left me access. Information, documents, shares held in structures Malcolm had forgotten existed. I wasn't going to just survive my son's betrayal. I was going to let it teach him something the hard way. That afternoon, while Malcolm and his fiancée toured wedding venues and smiled for cameras, Denise and I met in her office downtown, where the windows looked out over a river that moved steadily, no matter what humans did to each other. Denise laid out the papers like a chessboard. "Your husband had minority interests in Malcolm's development company," she said. Not enough for Malcolm to notice. Enough to matter. I stared at the numbers, the names of properties, the LLCs, the partnerships. My son had built his empire on the assumption that his parents were just background figures, that we were scenery, that we were too old to understand the machinery. Denise slid another sheet toward me. "If you trigger the right clauses," she said softly, "you can force a valuation event. You can force a sale of the shares. And if we do it publicly, through the right channels, it will be loud." I felt my pulse steady. My hands stopped trembling. I looked up at her. "Will it ruin him?" Denise didn't flinch. "It will reveal him." That was all I needed. Because I didn't want revenge the way young people want it: wild, messy, impulsive. I wanted consequences. I wanted reality to show up on his doorstep like a sheriff with a warrant. So we moved quietly. We filed what needed filing. We notified who needed notifying. We scheduled what needed scheduling. And I went home each evening and played the part Malcolm expected. I stayed in the background. I spoke softly. I moved slowly. I let his fiancée talk about paint colors and energy and manifesting abundance while she stood in my kitchen like a conqueror. I let Malcolm call me mom with that patronizing tenderness men use when they want to sound kind while taking everything. I watched them plan their wedding like the world was already theirs. And all the while, the clock was ticking toward the day I would auction off the foundation beneath their feet. I thought about nursing homes sometimes during that week, because Malcolm's petition wasn't just paperwork, it was a threat, a cage dressed up as care. I remembered visiting my friend Loretta in a facility after her stroke. The way the hallway smelled like bleach and loneliness. The way the TV in the common room stayed on too loud, as if noise could hide the fact that time was being wasted there. The way Loretta's daughter spoke over her, like Loretta wasn't in the room. "I'm fine," Loretta had whispered to me when her daughter stepped away. "I'm not crazy. I'm just inconvenient." That word again, inconvenient. That's what the world calls women when we stop being useful in the ways it prefers. And I promised myself, sitting beside Loretta's bed, that no one would ever make me disappear like that without a fight. I never thought my 70th birthday would be the night my own child tried to erase me. People love to say 70 is a blessing. They say it with their smiling mouths and their soft hands. Like age is a shawl you can wrap around someone's shoulders and call it warmth. But there are certain birthdays that don't feel like blessings. They feel like courtrooms, like executions, like a ceremony where the living decide what to do with you while you're still breathing. That evening was crisp, the kind of early autumn air that tastes faintly metallic, like the sky has already started sharpening its knives for winter. I had been up since sunrise, not because I needed to be, because I wanted to be, because the house was mine to prepare. And I still believed back then that a home holds what you pour into it. I polished the silver myself, even though my fingers cramped at the joints. I pressed linen napkins until they lay flat as little white promises. I placed the flowers in the center of the table, cream roses, pale hydrangeas, a few stems of eucalyptus that smelled like clean memory. I wore a wine-colored dress that made me feel like I still belonged to my own life. And I clipped on the gold earrings my late husband had given me when we were young and brave and foolish enough to believe love was permanent. The house was not a mansion, not the kind people imagine when they hear 70 and betrayed. It was simply a solid, well-kept home in a neighborhood that had aged alongside me. Old trees, wide sidewalks, porches that creaked with history. The living room still held the small scars of a life fully lived, a faint scratch on the hardwood from my grandson's toy truck, a chip on the baseboard from the time we moved the piano and laughed until we were dizzy. Every corner had a story. I used to think that mattered. I used to think the people inside the house would honor the stories. My son arrived just as the sky turned, the color of bruised peaches. Malcolm, my only child, 52 years old and still, somehow, the kind of man who walked into a room like it owed him applause. He came with noise, with perfume that wasn't mine, with a woman on his arm, as if she were an accessory he'd chosen to match his mood. She was young, too young for the role. She was auditioning for her smile, bright and practiced, her eyes constantly flicking around the room, as if she were appraising square footage. When she hugged me, she did it with the gentlest fingertips, like she was touching something fragile and temporary. "Happy birthday," she chirped, and I could already hear the word old hiding in the back of her throat like a secret. My friends filled the house with warmth at first. My neighbor Mrs. Calhoun brought her famous pound cake. My church sister Yvette hugged me hard and whispered, "70 looks good on you." Even my goddaughter, Denise, sharp as a blade in her tailored suit, came in carrying a gift bag and an energy that made the air feel safer. Denise had been my late husband's little cousin, then my shadow, then my student in life and law. She became an attorney because she couldn't stand watching people get swallowed by systems. And she loved me like family because I fed her when she was broke and listened to her when she was tired and defended her when she was misunderstood. She was the kind of person who didn't confuse politeness with loyalty. I didn't know how much that would matter in a few minutes. Music played softly, a little jazz playlist I'd made myself, old songs that tasted like living rooms and slow dancing, and evenings where nobody was trying to prove anything. I moved through the crowd, accepting compliments, laughing, pretending my knees didn't ache when I stood too long. I was trying to keep the moment gentle, trying to keep it human. Malcolm, though, was restless. He kept checking his phone like a man waiting for a curtain to rise. When it was time for the toast, I stood near the fireplace, my hands wrapped around a glass of sparkling cider because I'd promised myself I wouldn't numb anything tonight. I looked around at the faces, people who had known me through grief and joy, through childbirth and burial, through the slow surrender of time. My heart felt full for a second, not bursting, just steady, like a candle holding its flame. I said, "Thank you." I said, I was grateful. I said I had learned that the richest thing a person can own is peace. And that is when Malcolm decided to make me pay for every ounce of peace I'd ever tried to keep. He clinked his glass with a fork, rude, commanding. The sound cut through my living room like a crack in glass. Conversations died mid-breath. Faces turned. That young woman on his arm tucked herself closer, lips already curling into something like victory. "My mother," Malcolm began, loud enough to reach the hallway, loud enough to reach the neighbors if the windows had been open. His voice was dressed in false sincerity, the kind men use when they want to sound reasonable while doing something cruel. He looked at me the way you look at a chair you're planning to replace. "She's always been strong," he said, drawing out the word as if he were tasting it for bitterness. "But lately, it's clear she's not thinking clearly." The room stiffened. I felt it, that communal tightening people do when they sense a boundary is about to be crossed but they don't yet know if they'll stop it. Malcolm smiled. "Don't look shocked. I'm doing this for her own good." He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, and my body understood before my mind did. There are certain movements that carry a particular cruelty, a kind of rehearsed confidence. I had seen that movement once before in my life at a hospital, when a doctor reached for a clipboard and didn't look me in the eye. Malcolm pulled out a thick envelope. Not a birthday card, not a letter. Legal paper, stiff and official, the kind that smells like cold ink and clean indifference. He didn't hand it to me. He handed it to Denise, as if he wanted witnesses, as if he wanted a referee. Denise's eyes narrowed. She took it slowly, like she was holding something contaminated. She glanced down at the return address, and her jaw tightened in a way that made my stomach drop. Malcolm, she said, quiet but deadly. What is this? He lifted his chin. It's time we faced reality. He turned to the crowd, performing. I've made arrangements, he announced, for my mother to move into a facility. A beautiful place. Full care, full-time professionals, because she can't manage alone anymore. A few gasps fluttered like startled birds. My neighbor's hand flew to her mouth. Yvette whispered, Lord, like she was praying the words could unsay themselves. I didn't speak. Not because I had nothing to say, because my chest had gone cold in a way I'd never felt before. Not even at funerals, Malcolm continued, enjoying the attention. And since she's moving, he said, it makes sense that the house becomes manageable. He smiled wider, as if he were about to gift me something. My fiancé and I, he said, gesturing to the young woman who was now practically shining with hunger. We're going to renovate, modernize, make it a real home for a growing family. My living room swayed, slightly, not because I was dizzy, because the audacity was so large it warped the air. I looked at him this boy I had rocked to sleep with my back against a cold apartment wall, when his father and I were still trying to find our footing. This boy whose school lunches I packed with hands that smelled like soap and sacrifice. This boy whose fevers I broke with damp cloths and whispered prayers. And here he was, standing in my house, on my birthday, announcing my disappearance, like it was a renovation plan. Someone laughed nervously, like people do when they don't know where to put their horror. A glass clinked by accident. The music kept playing because the playlist didn't know my heart was splitting open. Denise opened the envelope, just enough to see the first page. Her eyes flicked to mine, and in that look I saw what Malcolm didn't realize. He had chosen the wrong audience for his cruelty. He thought everyone would sit politely in shock. He thought my age would make me fold. He thought embarrassment would turn me into something quiet and compliant. He didn't know I had lived long enough to recognize a hostile takeover when I saw one. Malcolm reached for my hand as if to stage a compassionate moment, but I stepped back. Not dramatically, just a small shift that said, you don't get to touch me while you're trying to bury me. Mom, he said, now using a softer voice for the crowd. I know this is hard, but it's necessary. Necessary. Like death, like paperwork, like erasing the inconvenient. My throat tightened. I could feel tears sitting behind my eyes, hot and furious, but I didn't let them out. Tears are honest, and I was not going to gift him honesty in front of his new bride like it was a performance for her benefit. I smoothed my shawl over my shoulders the way my mother taught me, keep your hands steady, even if your soul is shaking. Then I said, calmly, not tonight. The room held its breath. Malcolm blinked, thrown off script. Excuse me. I turned slightly, addressing everyone without raising my voice. Thank you for coming, I said. Please eat. Please enjoy yourselves. And if you love me, don't make this worse by feeding it. Then I walked into my kitchen. Not because I was running, because I needed air that didn't taste like betrayal. Behind me, I heard whispers, the uneasy shuffle of feet, someone murmuring Malcolm's name like a warning. Denise followed me into the kitchen, closing the door gently behind her. For a moment we just stood there, two women breathing in the humming quiet of a room that had no witnesses. Denise set the papers on the counter like they were something sharp. He filed a petition, she said, voice low. Guardianship, conservatorship. He's trying to claim you're incompetent. My mouth went dry. The night before Malcolm's wedding was supposed to happen, he threw a dinner in my dining room, a rehearsal dinner, he called it. Even though he hadn't rehearsed a single ounce of respect for the woman whose home he was using as a stage. They lit candles. They hired a private chef. The fiancée wore a white dress that glowed in my chandelier light, like she was daring me to say something. People toasted to new beginnings. They said Malcolm had finally found happiness. They said his fiancée was such a breath of fresh air. I sat at the end of the table, quiet, my hands folded, my face calm. Denise had told me earlier that day, once we press go, there's no unpressing it. And I had replied, then press it. At exactly midnight, while Malcolm was laughing upstairs. while his fiance's friends were filming TikToks in my hallway. Denise's paperwork went live, the clause triggered. The valuation event began, and the first calls started ringing by sunrise. Not to me, not to Malcolm, his partners, his investors, the bank, the people whose respect he rented with performance. They called him with panic in their voices, with confusion, with disbelief. What do you mean, your shares are being sold? What, do you mean there's an auction? What do you mean your mother owns? And that's when Malcolm's world did what all stolen worlds do. It started collapsing under the weight of the truth. By the time he came downstairs, face pale, phone clutched like a lifeline, his fiancée was already crying into her ring light, mascara streaking, trying to spin the disaster into content. This is sabotage, she sobbed. This is elder jealousy. She's trying to ruin us. Malcolm looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as a mother, as an opponent. He opened his mouth, and I could tell he wanted to roar, to accuse, to demand, to remind me of my place. But there is something about a woman in her 70s who has finally stopped begging to be loved properly. We are terrifying in our calm. I took a sip of my tea. Then I said, softly, you served me papers in front of people who love me. You announced my disappearance like it was a gift. So I decided you needed a lesson in what it feels like to lose control of your own story. His lips parted. You can't do this. I tilted my head. I already did. And here's the part I didn't expect, the part that softened the blade without dulling it. When Malcolm's fiancée realized there would be no mansion, no polished empire, no clean narrative, she stepped back from him like he smelled like smoke. Her love, if you could call it that, evaporated the moment the lifestyle did. She left before lunch. She left behind a garment bag and a half-empty bottle of champagne and the kind of silence that tastes like shame. Malcolm stood in my kitchen afterward, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, as if he couldn't understand how his plan had failed. He looked smaller. Not because he'd shrunk, because entitlement deflates fast when it meets consequence. He whispered, I was trying to secure my future. I set my cup down gently. No, I said. You were trying to secure your comfort at the cost of my dignity. His voice cracked. I thought you'd be taken care of. I laughed once quiet, bitter. You thought I'd be stored. He flinched, and for a moment, I saw something young in him. Not innocence, just fear, and then, because I am still a mother, even when my child doesn't deserve the softer parts of me, I said something I never thought I would say out loud. I did not raise you to be a man who humiliates his mother for applause. He swallowed hard. Tears appeared, surprising both of us. I don't know what happened to me, he whispered. I stared at him for a long moment, and in that pause the whole house seemed to listen. Then I said, that's your work now, not mine, because redemption is not a thing you hand someone like a towel. Redemption is something they earn with changed behavior in the dark, when nobody is watching. Weeks passed. The legal process continued, like a river, slow, relentless. Malcolm didn't vanish, but he didn't swagger anymore either. He called. He asked to meet. He apologized in fits and starts, like a man learning a new language with a mouth full of pride. I didn't forgive him quickly. I didn't punish him endlessly. I did something older women learn to do when we finally stop confusing love with self-erasure. I watched. I watched if he showed up when no one forced him. I watched if he spoke my name with respect when he thought I couldn't hear. I watched if he treated other people, waiters, assistants, strangers, with the same care he suddenly wanted to perform for me. And slowly, something shifted. Not into a fairy tale, into something real. One afternoon, months later, I visited a nursing facility, not because Malcolm forced me, but because I chose to speak there. Denise arranged it. A small room, folding chairs, a handful of older women and a few adult children with tired eyes. I told them the truth. Not the glossy version. The version where humiliation can happen under chandeliers and still be abuse. The version where a child can love you and still try to control you. The version where age can make people underestimate your mind. And that underestimation can become your quiet weapon if you're willing to be patient. Afterward, a woman with silver hair and trembling hands gripped my wrist and whispered, "How did you not break?" I looked at her and said, "Oh, I broke. I just didn't shatter." That night, I went home to my modest house, still mine, and I stood in my doorway for a long moment, breathing in the scent of lemon polish and old wood and the faint sweetness of the flowers I'd placed on my table. The house wasn't a trophy, it was proof. Proof that my life was not a thing my son could redistribute like an asset. I turned off the lights one by one and let the quiet settle around me. Not the quiet of being silenced. The quiet of choosing silence because you finally trust your own presence. And as I lay in bed, the moonlight spilling across my quilt like a soft blessing, I thought about how strange it is how time peels away everything that's fake. It peels away youth. It peels away performance. It peels away the kind of love that only stays when it benefits. What remains, if you're lucky, is truth. And if you're strong enough, you stop begging others to hold that truth for you. You hold it yourself. Because I am not just someone's mother. I am a woman who has lived long enough to know the difference between care and control. And if anyone listening to me is sitting in a room right now, wondering if your age makes you powerless, let me leave you with this. Soft as a whisper and heavy as a stone, age does not weaken a woman who finally remembers she owns herself. It only makes her harder to move.